7:20 here at the Big 550 KTRS. McGraw will be back tomorrow. Until then, I am Paul Harris. Well, technically, I'm always Paul Harris, and you are always Kelly Jackson. I won't stop being Paul Harris tomorrow when McGraw comes back.
I will miss you, though.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll just be sleeping a little bit later, and he'll start getting up a little early, and I'm sure have stories about the trip that he's just completed to Europe with a couple of hundred of our listeners. Was it a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand? I lost track.
I think a couple of hundred.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So he'll be back in here tomorrow, and then Friday I'll be back on my regular Friday afternoon show, which of course includes the Harris Challenge and Knuckleheads in the News. One of the topics I've discussed at length for years now is the problem with concussions in the NFL. And we've heard a lot about this, and the NFL has finally admitted that they have a problem and that they are being forced by the Players Association's lawsuits to do something about it and to try to make head-to-head contact something that is rarer than it has been in the past, that's penalized much more than it used to be, so that a player who comes into the league now is supposedly less likely to be susceptible to getting a concussion or a traumatic brain injury for that matter. But in the discussions of concussions, there was a lot of talk about what about before players get to the NFL? Because remember, contact for a lot of football players starts when they're 8, 9, 10 years old. Then when they get into high school and they play on that team, there's a lot of contact. And certainly when they get into college and are playing on an NCAA team. Well, there's a new report now about NCAA football head injury from some researchers at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. And ABC's Ryan Burrow joins us now with details. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning. Yeah, 2 points you can kind of take out of this study. Number one, the more exposed players are to full contact hits, the more likely they are to suffer head injuries. Makes sense, right? More times you're bashing heads, the more likely you are to suffer some kind of injury. The study calls that an unnecessarily high risk. The NCAA does not, at this point, regulate full contact practices. So it's potentially, in this survey's conclusion, it's putting thousands of players at the higher risk of head injuries. Now, the NFL, where it stands right now, it regulates teams to 14 full contact practices. The NCAA doesn't have that. So you might have a team, Missouri might be doing X number of full contact practices, while Florida may be doing X number, and Ohio State may be doing X number of full contact practices. That's not regulated, and as a result, you've got differences in the amount of potential head injuries you've got at these various schools.
In fact, the UVA researchers checked how many practices the UVA team had last year, and it was 59 full contact practices. The NFL, as you point out, limits it to 14. That's 4 times as many head-to-head opportunities in the course of a season for these kids.
Yeah, exactly. 16 players, and what they did is they actually put sensors inside the helmets to detect, where the head impacts were, when they were, and they broke down the practices. Helmet-only practices. Those really don't mean too much. The helmets are just there to kind of protect the players while they do walkthroughs. Then they had half-pad practices, full pad practices, and they noticed each level you went up, the more likely players were to be exposed to some kind of head impact or head injury. Of course, games being the most likely to experience some kind of head impact. So, this survey kind of breaks out, when people are more likely to have head impacts, and point out that the NCAA doesn't really regulate how many head impacts these schools have.
I think by fining them, that could help do it. Possibly.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Now, the NCAA has come back and says because there's no real research done on the amount of head impacts and the result of head injuries, they haven't found a need to regulate. So this survey kind of begins this process, I suppose, of exposing to the NCAA, how many impacts there are and what the relation is versus game-style, high-impact, and low-impact practices.
Sounds to me like the NCAA is still behind the NFL, which wasn't exactly a leader in being aware of the concussion protocols you needed during a game. But there was a class action lawsuit that was filed by a whole bunch of former and current college players against the NCAA last year, and a $70 million fund was supposed to be set up on that, but they're actually still arguing about that. A judge rejected it and said it was too little, and they're still trying to come to some sort of deal about, the guys who used to play college football, even the ones who did not go on to the NFL, NFL, there are something like 4.4 million of these guys who could have sustained serious problems, traumatic brain injury, et cetera, including CTE, the one that has affected so many NFL players, because they're out there on the field hitting each other so hard and going helmet to helmet. And what you just said there a moment ago, Ryan, about the way they break down the practices, about the more stuff you're wearing, the more likely you are to suffer from some sort of head injury, that should be enough to tell these schools, you have a better responsibility ahead of you if you're going to take care of these kids, right?
Yeah, but remember, there's a lot of money tied in with a lot of these programs to make your team the best possible. It helps for recruiting. It helps for getting a lot of support for the school financially. It's interesting to see, because remember, the NFL, everything's exposed. Everyone knows there's a ton of money being shared around between all the teams. But the NCAA, a little bit different of a game, and the harder you work and the more successful you are, the better odds you have of recruiting and pulling in money for the program. And like you said, they seem to be lagging behind when it comes to head injuries, and that may be a reason.
Yeah, but if the NFL has finally realized that they have to do something about that, and that's a $9 billion company, the NFL, and it's 32 leagues, 32 teams in the league, they've got to be saying a universal message here, and the NCAA has got to start paying attention to this. Because one of the problems we're going to see as the word concussion gets repeated over and over again in a football context is moms and dads saying, you know what? I don't want little Jimmy to go down that route. I don't want him to do that. It would have been nice for him to be able to play football, but if he's going to have to worry about if he can walk and think and live past his 30s, this is going to be an ongoing, continuing problem for the National Football League and its minor league, the NCAA.
Absolutely. I mean, the football right now is kind of at a breaking point to find out how they're going to move forward, because, I mean, I've got two little ones. I don't expect my son to play football. It's partially because we're not exactly the largest of folks, but it's not something that I would even think about putting him in, just because of what the research shows right now, and I think a lot of parents feel the same way.
Absolutely. All right, Ryan, thanks for your time this morning. That's ABC's Ryan Burrow joining us here on the Big 550 KTRS. Now, while we're talking about head injuries, this weekend is NFL Hall of Fame weekend, which means they have the first preseason game, but they also are going to induct this year's class of NFL greats. And one of those who's going in is Junior Seau, who was one of the all-time great linebackers in his career of 20 years, most of it with the Chargers, but also with the Patriots and the Lions, a guy who was a Pro Bowler 12 times and who 3 years ago killed himself by shooting himself in the chest because he was suffering from CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is a degenerative brain disease linked to repeated hits to the head. Now, there's been some controversy because Junior Seau's daughter, Sydney, wanted to give his acceptance speech. In fact, Junior said, if I ever get into the Hall of Fame, Sydney, I want you to do the speech for me in Canton. Mm-hmm. The NFL has said, no, she can't do that because Junior Seau's family is suing the NFL over those head injuries that he got, and they don't want her to get up there and say anything. So just a couple of days ago, after a lot of pressure from a lot of sports media, TV and radio, the NFL agreed to allow Sydney to be interviewed at the dinner for inductees tomorrow night. The actual ceremony doesn't take place until Saturday, and the NFL says, well, we have a policy that we've had for several years now that if somebody is dead, if we're assigning this honor posthumously, then we have a video display of how great they were in their career that will go on for 5 or 6 minutes, and we're going to do that for Junior, but no one would speak for him, just as no one would speak for any of the other dead inductees. However, she can be spoken to by the media. Isn't that nice that the NFL is giving her permission to speak to the media?
That's surprising. First of all, I think that's an odd policy to not have a family member or a family spokesperson be able to accept the award. They do that for all award shows.
Yes, they do.
So it doesn't make any sense to me.
Any other Lifetime Achievement Award, which is what this is,
yes,
they let somebody get up there and do that. But
That's-
not in this case, and particularly in this case because the
Because
NFL
of-
does not want somebody on a national platform talking about head injuries while it is still an issue.
Who's to say that any of the other Hall of Famers wouldn't speak of it?
I wonder if they will. I wonder if they will say it's too bad that no one in Junior's family is allowed to be here today because this is a problem, and it was a problem when I played,
Right.
and the NFL lied to us about it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The NFL does say that Thursday night's dinner will be broadcast on the NFL Network, so when Sydney is interviewed, that will have a national TV platform, but it's not quite the same as the
No.
Hall of Fame induction ceremony in Canton this weekend. 7:30 at the Big 550 KTRS.
I'm Dr. Dan Gagliotti.
And I'm Dr. Nick Barnes.